Thanks for tuning in to The Leadership Beat, a Bates Communications original podcast series exploring leadership trends and inspiring leaders to innovate and think differently.
Hi, I'm Sarah Woods, and welcome to The Leadership Beat.
Today I'm sitting down with Margo Cook, president of Nuveen Advisory Services, to talk about some of the insights and surprises gained from her rise to the top. Nuveen, part of TIAA, is one of the world's most prominent brands in global investment management. In Margo's role, she leads Nuveen's global client organization, overseeing product, marketing, and distribution for over $1 trillion in assets under management. She's also a member of Nuveen's Fund Board and an executive sponsor of LEAD, Nuveen's women's professional organization. Margo's also an active member of several nonprofit boards and a strong advocate for women in financial services. Margo, welcome to the Leadership Beat.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, Margo, you've risen in leadership roles for many years now at several very successful companies. How have you grown as a leader over the years?
Well, typically you're chosen in your career to be a manager because you're good at something, because you have some kind of technical expertise, and then people say, okay, well, you're going to be the manager now. And so what I had to learn early on when I first got my first management role, I was about 10 years out of undergrad, and I got put into this role as head of fixed income. So I'm a portfolio manager for about 10 years. I got pretty good at doing that, and then I became the manager. And I was, at the time, the only female on the team. I was the youngest person on the team. And I dare say I had no idea what I was doing as a manager. So I had to learn really fast. And my first challenge in that role was that one of my peers, who was a man a couple years older than me, who actually was a really good friend and a good peer, he was competing for that role, and he wasn't happy that I got the job. So in my first management position, I had someone on the team who was not happy with his position now, and he was a pretty key contributor to the team. So I got some advice early on from one was from my chief investment officer at the time, who said, you're a leader now, you're a manager now, and you're going to have to assume that role, and people are going to expect you to assume that role, and you can't be everyone's friend. And so you have to go from this peer role to this manager role, and you have to figure out, what am I doing with that authority, with that position, and how do I get this person who is a key contributor on the team to feel good about his role? And so I had to really think through, what does it mean to be a manager, and how do I get him comfortable? And I learned a lot of lessons through that process of, how do I, sort of assume this team? Not everyone is going to always want you as the manager. How do you actually embrace those people and help them to become part of the team? So that was the first piece of advice. The second was that, along the lines of building a strong team, I always tell people that the single most important thing you do as a manager and or leader is to have a strong team underneath you. It's critical. The only way you can actually elevate up and be the vision of that team and to be able to provide the environment for that team to do well is if the people that are reporting to you are strong. And if that team is, each and every person on that team is as strong as they can be, and together you form a very cohesive unit, you'll have a really, really strong position as a leader. And so I had to take that piece of advice of, you have to elevate up and you have to form a strong team in order to really understand how to move forward in that role. So I'd say we ended up actually moving that person to another part of the organization, which was good for his career, good for us as a team. And what I really learned in that moment was that if you don't have the right people on your team, there's other opportunities for them where they can excel too. Mm-hmm. But you as a leader have to have the people on your team who understand what the mission is and are aligned with your leadership. And I think that's really critical.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, given those lessons, I'm curious how you think about what's important for developing our leaders of the future. I know that's something you care a lot about and have been involved with that, Nuveen, in a mentorship role and have really worked to advance people within your own organization and lift them up. So what's important for us to understand about developing the next generation?
I think this next generation is going to be different, frankly, than the way we grew up. I mean, we grew up a little bit...
I hope so.
Yeah, exactly. We grew up with more along the lines of like, here's the rules, here's the work, put your head down and go do the work. And this next generation is fantastic in the sense that there's a really strong desire to have a purpose to what they're doing, that the work they do has to have an impact on the world. I just had this amazing conversation with my nephew who just started his first job out of college. And he's an engineer, he's in this really interesting role. And what he's saying is, I want to succeed at being an engineer in this company, but I also have to know that I'm making an impact on the world and that what I'm doing is important. And we have to understand that viewpoint is something to capture and something to really help us in our generation make a difference in the companies that we're leading. And so I think having a really strong sense of vision, of purpose, and understanding how to motivate younger people to be leaders so that they feel like they're having an impact on the organization and on the world is really critical.
Yes, and of course, when we're demonstrating that and we're modeling that really gives them the opportunity to develop their own point of view and their own connection to the mission and to become even better leaders in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So you've also been at the forefront of leading a series of significant transformation strategies at Nuveen. And your team is truly international, which means you're leading global organizations across geos and cultures through change. And I know our listeners would be curious to hear one or two secrets that really make that work.
So we became a global organization really just a few years ago. We are now this large asset management company through the acquisition that TIA made of Nuveen. We're now $1 trillion manager. We manage about 2/3 of those assets are U.S. based for teachers and not-for-profits in the U.S. through TIA. And then we've got a really strong growing business outside the U.S. And so, to your question, we are learning really how to be this multinational global organization. And what I would say is that you can't do this from your home office. You have to be out in the market, and you have to speak to clients, you have to speak to the people that work for you. You really have to understand what's happening in the culture and the local office. And so I've literally been around the world a few times in the last couple of years because I need to understand the point of view of our clients and really understand what they're looking for. And I won't know that if I'm reading a call report. You have to know that in person, sitting across the table, whether it's a meal or a meeting, you're hearing directly from clients around what their concerns are, or what the local culture is really about. But then your own people, I think it's really important that you are having one-on-one relationships with the people that work for you. And so there might be some issues that I'm going to find out. When I was in Copenhagen a couple months ago, I actually found out that there was some marketing and sales and marketing coordination issues that needed attention. I never would have known that if I didn't sit in that office and hear that directly from our distribution people. When I'm in Japan, I find out directly from the people in that office that they need a bigger office because we've done so much hiring recently that I literally walked in and I thought, this is probably a health issue here. We've got to get them bigger space. And you don't know those things unless you're sitting with people locally. And so my biggest sort of learning in leading a global business is to get out and go see clients and go see your own people. I'd say the second thing is we tend to manage with our own, sort of through our own lens. And so we're a US-based company. And we might do things like have meetings at 2:00 in the afternoon when somebody in Asia should be sleeping at that point. So there are some simple customs and some simple points of attention to local customs and to local cultural traits that you got to know Otherwise, it feels like it's going to feel to that person sitting in Asia that they work for a U.S. company rather than a global company. So I think it's a lot about the people. It's a lot about the model you set up. So some companies set up models where everything sort of filters up to the center. What we've done is a little bit of a hybrid where the people that are sitting locally have a regional leader, and that regional leader feels empowered to really run the local organization, to be able to make decisions locally, hire locally. Obviously, it's all in accordance with the values of the organization, but we've really felt strongly that you have to empower people on the ground to act locally. So we've got the power of $1 trillion company and the power of this really large-scaled organization that's paired with this feeling of being local in region, and that I think has been effective with clients and obviously with the people that are working for us.
I think that's terrific, and what you're describing in some ways is really respecting that change isn't creating a compliance model, but it's really engaging others in being able to embrace the change and understand it and translate it not just in the language of the local culture, but in the ways of working in the local culture. And that's sounds like it's working for you very positively.
Yeah, I mean it's we've made tons of mistakes along the way, and I will tell you, if you're not careful in targeting the markets that you're in, it's expensive. So when I first assumed responsibility for our global effort, we were in 47 different countries, which was a major wake-up call for me. My first reaction was, who's going to jail? Like, this is not good. So you've got to really make sure that you're targeting not just the geography, but also the client segment, and ensuring that obviously the things that for us, our investment capabilities are paired right with those geography and client segments. But it's expensive if you don't do it right. And I think from a regulatory standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from really understanding what the local regulatory regimes are, that's a really important element of this. So we pared that back actually and brought it down to, we're in about 21 countries today, and we're able to actually escalate our presence or deepen our presence because we're focusing on really building out a limited number of target areas. And I think that's also empowering to the people that are in those regions, where they can get resources that they need, instead of feeling like, we're sort of so thinly spread, and then you raise your hand and you can't get a resource. That's, I don't think, a good way. We had to learn our lesson on that. And I think retrenching in order to actually grow is really the strategy that's been working for us.
And it sounds like you made some tough decisions around that, which was really a hallmark of building and deploying strategy, is making some of those tough decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, because at the end of the day, you may be saying to somebody in a region, you've done a really good job of building this, but it's not a priority for us, and we need you to sort of reorient yourself and look at this region that we think we can grow. And that, you risk that person saying, hey, that's not for me, and I don't want to stay with the organization. And we've been fortunate that we've been able to set the strategy so that it both embraces what we need to do to build the organization and recognizes the skill of the people that we have.
So what are some of the implications or considerations when you're leading teams internationally?
I think one of the most interesting parts of leading a global organization is that you are at one point really trying to understand the culture that exists within the regions that you're managing. So what's different about Japan versus Southern Europe? You have to really understand that. The other side of it is you have employees that are sitting typically in smaller offices that may not know the culture of your organization. And so one of the most important lessons I've learned is that it's a two-way street, that we are both trying to embrace the culture regionally and locally and empower people within those areas, but it's also my responsibility to ensure, and the company's responsibility to ensure, that people that are hired into these smaller offices actually understand the culture and the values of the company they work for. And so one of the real values of actually traveling is to go have conversations one-on-one or with teams to both understand where they're coming from, but also to convey what the values of the organization are. And the only way you can really do that is in person. And so, we do a lot of things in the organization via email and through videos, but really being in person and having that two-way street with each other has been very effective.
So with all that travel, you've really built quite a world perspective, and I'm sure that's informing your perspective on diversity and inclusion here at home. And I know that you've been a real champion of these initiatives at Nuveen and have made a professional and personal commitment, in particular to advancing women in finance. So I'm curious what you've learned about how to move the needle that might be surprising.
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, the needle is moving in the wrong direction. It's moving down. The numbers of women that have come into investment professional roles in the last 5 years has actually gone down. Mm-hmm. And so the question is why? Like, what's happening, and why, given the fact that there are actually more women graduating from college and business schools, why can't we bring them into our industry? And I think some of that is that during the financial crisis, I think a lot of people, men and women, saw their parents experience a pretty rough go in the financial markets. And I think that has had a big impact on whether women want to come into this industry. We've done some surveys that show that women think this industry is not it's a boys' club, it's not a great place to be. And the reality is, for me, I've been in this industry for my whole career. It's been an amazing journey to be part of the capital markets and part of helping people to manage their assets in a way that helps them to live their dreams and fulfill their lives. And so I think we've got to do some more work to bring women into the industry, but also keep women in the industry. And so a couple of things that I've seen that can work are that I recently had this experience with two other senior women in our industry, two other leaders in asset management, where we invited about 25 women in the industry to join us on a 3-day weekend. And it was a place where we could talk about what's happening in the industry and how do we attract and retain women into the industry. And first of all, it was a ton of fun. We had a great time. It was actually in Montana. So I did fly fishing for the first time, which it's fortunate I have this job, because if I had to depend on that living, that would be bad. And I rode a horse, and we went, ATVing, and it was really a fun time. So we loosened up and we got to know each other, and we talked about our careers. It actually took 3 full nights for us to get through everybody's story. And what we found was that there was a ton in common in terms of how we've navigated our career. And what we talked about was that women really need these mini networks, I'll call them, or cohorts, where we know each other. If you think about why a lot of people get opportunities in their lives, it's because of who they know. It's because of the networks and the relationships they've formed. And I think one of the issues in our industry is that women just don't know each other. And so I think forming these smaller networks, and if they're social, it's really fun too. It's a chance to drink wine and, have a great conversation. But in forming these relationships, we're able to help each other. And so one of the things we committed to each other at the end of the weekend to do was that if anybody needed each other, we would immediately respond, whether it was advice or a referral or some way that would help each other in our careers. And since then, this happened in May, a couple people have gotten board seats. We've helped each other in certain situations with advice. And what we have committed to each other to do, we've done, which is to really be there for each other and to try to help each other both with situations but also opportunities. And I think if we could scale that out and actually have these sort of small networks of women who know each other, we could actually help women to stay in this industry and to be attracted to grow their career and to find those opportunities that you normally can't find because you don't have those relationships. So I think that's one big thing, big takeaway that I've been talking about in the industry and trying to form these cohorts with peers. I think the second big thing is that younger women need to see that these careers are possible, and the only way you can do that is by having women in these roles. So to be visible and to see someone in a senior role means you feel like you can do it. And so one of the things that I've been working on with my undergrad, University of Rhode Island, is to start a female executive in residence for the business school, where we would like to have women come in and sort of rotate through and be able to sit with women that are in the finance school or in finance rather, in the business school, and can understand that these careers are possible and that they're really fun and really interesting, and that there's a lot you can do in financial services and in asset management that you might not think is possible. So that just the sense of visibility, of seeing that other women have done this, that you can do it too, I think that's an important element.
Fantastic. Well, along that vein, were you to now go back to your 25-year-old self, getting out of that undergrad program, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, so I would say that a few things. One is, if you get an opportunity to take a role outside the U.S., do it. Outside of your home country, do it. And I probably sort of along the way had that opportunity, but I think I was a little intimidated by it and was uncomfortable with it. And frankly, it wasn't until the last few years that I've traveled this much and built a business outside the U.S., and it's unbelievable. I mean, to be sitting, I moderated a panel in Japan recently about stakeholder views versus shareholder views. And so we had people from around the world on this panel talking about what companies need to think about. Do they need to think about employees' viewpoints? Do they need to think about what customers think about? Or should they just think about their shareholder? Well, that kind of an opportunity to sit in front of an audience that's sort of, multinational, it's pretty amazing. So I think getting the opportunity to work outside of your home country is something that I would definitely recommend for somebody that's younger. I would say the second thing is don't be afraid to fix something. If you see something that's not working, raise your hand and come up with a solution to fix it. A couple of the ways I've gotten my jobs in my career have been because I saw something wasn't working, and maybe it was a little presumptuous at 25, but I said, hey, when I was fixed income portfolio manager, I didn't think the way we were communicating to clients and the actual collateral we were using really demonstrated what the company was about. And I went to marketing and helped create a whole new set of collateral. I was fixed income portfolio manager. Like, what did I know? And maybe it was a little arrogant, but I learned early on to raise your hand if you see something that's not working, because it will lead you to other opportunities around the organization. I'd say the third thing is it's really important to have a great relationship with your boss. So you need that, but that's not the end of your relationships around the organization. One of the things I've learned is that you really have to know people up, down, sideways around the company. And the more you build your reputation and build those relationships, the more opportunity you'll get from having those relationships. And what I've learned is, unfortunately, your boss can move on. And then if you only had that vertical relationship with he or she in that role, then you've sort of lost what you've built through the company. And so have relationships around the company, people that know you. The other benefit of that is when those people know you and they talk to your boss and they say good things, that's a good thing for your reputation. But it's really important that you not just think about the vertical that you're in, but begin to think about how you influence horizontally through the company. And that level of influence will help you grow in your career.
So volunteer to get onto different committees, participate in different opportunities, and build those relationships.
Exactly. One really simple way that I got to know people early on in my career was I volunteered to go to all the benefit dinners. So it would be, this charity or that not-for-profit was having a dinner. They needed somebody to come sit at the table. I went to all those dinners. And suddenly I knew the head of HR, I knew the head of technology, I knew people around the company that I would never have had the chance to meet at that young of an age, but I got myself into situations where I could get to know those people. And I think we sometimes feel like our boss is going to solve all the problems in the world, and having been a boss now for a few years, it's you want to believe you're thinking about your people all the time, but you're thinking about other things. So I think as my strong advice is to build a network and build relationships and stay in touch with those relationships through your career, but really understanding how the organization works horizontally, I like to say, versus vertically.
Great advice. Margo, thank you for your candor, your insights, and for sharing your unique take on leadership with our listeners.
Thank you so much, Sarah.